computer says maybe, live. It's lovely to have you all here. It's also really amazing to do this in a city with so many friends and family and community, and just like kind of, to be honest, a little overwhelming having different contexts. Every face I look at, I'm like, I know that person in a completely different way than the person sitting next to them, but I really appreciate you all being here. And for those I don't yet know, hopefully get to meet you after the show. Also want to thank these 4 fabulous people for joining the conversation tonight. We were sort of trying to figure out how best to have a conversation about what is going on in the UK. And the number of ways one could have that conversation is pretty... There's a lot, and these are 4 people who, in really interesting ways, have been engaging on the subject of technology politics in the UK. 2 of them, which I'll let you think who they might be, have recently won, or kind of won, court cases that are quite relevant, very recently, some as recently as today. We will hear more about them in a second. It's okay, it's going to be great. She hasn't yet won them. She just won a right to sue, but we'll get there. So these are 4 people who I've known for quite some time, and it's also really nice because it feels like they're sitting on my living room couch, and we can have a nice conversation that I think will go some interesting places. Originally, we thought we would divide this evening in 2, and you were going to get an intermission. For those of you who pay attention to schedules, we lied to you. We realized actually there's no real division in the topics because all the things that they work on sort of interconnect and interrelate, so we're going to have one long, lovely conversation. And with that, I want to hear you all introduce yourselves, but I know that that is particularly tricky for some of you who don't have easy affiliations, so we want to avoid existential crises. But if each of you could say your name, however you want to describe your affiliation, and just a little bit about your work before we dig into a couple of questions. Seyi, you can do it, you can do it.
Hi, everybody. My name is Seyi Akiwowo. I am a global advisor on tech and democracy, founder of Glitch, which was part of changing the Online Safety Act to include women and girls, and author of How to Stay Safe Online. I also sit on a bunch of tech boards, including TikTok, to help improve content moderation and things in AI as well.
You did great.
Thank you.
Hi everyone, I'm Tanya O'Carroll. I'm definitely going to get existential. I'm a campaigner and organizer working in the tech justice space is probably the best description. I have kind of worked in a lot of different spaces, strategic communications, tech policy, and I co-founded something called People versus Big Tech, which is a campaign movement in Europe of 140 organizations focused on how we win back power from big tech. And I also co-founded Amnesty Tech.
And with that, I am Matt Mahmoudi. I work for Amnesty Tech, amongst other things, as an advisor and researcher on artificial intelligence and human rights. I have led up the attempt to ban facial recognition technologies and try to make them known in different places. By and large, I would describe myself as hunting bad big tech companies and governments that use their products. I'm also an assistant professor in digital humanities, where I look at the ways in which processes of racial exploitation and profiteering play out in the tech industry. Really lovely to be here with everyone tonight.
And my name is Martha Dark. I'm one of the co-founders and one of the directors of a litigation and campaigning nonprofit called Foxglove. We exist to make the use of technology fair, and that involves suing companies tech companies, when they abuse their power, workers or environment. And we bring cases against the UK government for using algorithms or mass decision-making systems that result in discrimination or unfairness.
Wonderful, you guys did great. Okay, so to kick us off, I mean, I think one thing I'm thinking a lot about is Keir Starmer's desire to use AI to leapfrog all of the political and economic problems in this country. And we've had recent history of attempts by the UK government to use technology to make everything magically better, like the NHS. Martha, I want to start with you. Do you want to give us a little bit of context on the NHS Palantir, shall we call it a partnership, and your work on that, and sort of how you're feeling about sort of the outsourcing of big chunks of the UK social state to companies?
So I've known about Palantir for a long time, because before we started Foxglove, myself and my colleagues who I founded Foxglove with worked in abuses and counter-terror. And Palantir is a company who is famous for not health, famous for counterinsurgency in Iraq and Afghanistan, separating kids at the US-Mexico border, sort of all of the bad stuff you can imagine. And at the start of the pandemic, my colleague Corey said, something seems a bit fishy here, they're offering their services for £1 to the NHS. And they were offering their services, it was completely secret. The contract wasn't public, we couldn't find anything about it. And what we knew was that Palantir, this spy tech company, American spy tech company that's founded by Peter Thiel, who's a kind of Trump-backing millionaire, was going to provide what was called the COVID-19 data store, which was sort of the single source of truth for data in the pandemic. And yeah, they initially got the contract for £1. We sued them over the fact that the contract was secret. And that was very much their sort of intention to try to embed themselves in the NHS for the long term, and for good reason. But I think Palantir's sort of secret entry, consolidation, and now sort of near total dominance of the NHS health data space is quite a good microcosm of like big tech's plans for corporate capture of our data and public services. But to jump forwards from them getting that contract for the COVID-19 data store in 2019, they then got a new contract for 23.5 million. And then if you jump to 2023, they got a contract for something called the Federated Data Platform, which was a system that was sort of the backbone of all of of kind of how health data was managed by the NHS. It was the biggest centralization of health data that had ever happened. And the contract for that was nearly £500 million. And they got those contracts not because, in my view, they were deserving of them, but it was incredibly obvious kind of taking advantage of the relaxation of the procurement rules during the pandemic, incredible lobbying. Like there was some brilliant, I can't remember if you'll remember this, but there was some brilliant, I can't remember which journalist it was, but he did some digging into the like Davos details, and he uncovered all of the receipts for their schmoozing of NHS execs with watermelon cocktails. But it was an incredible amount of lobbying, revolving doors of like Palantir and the NHS for forever. And then also they had a huge unfair advantage when it came to the Federated Data Platform, because they'd already been running the system, and so they were able to run pilots in a way that kind of people who were trying to bid for the FDP contract had no such opportunity. And I think this shows us, I think, how big tech takes control and profits from public services. Because, I mean, of course, everyone in this room, I imagine, has interacted with the NHS at some point, and the NHS has cradle to grave information about anyone who uses it. And the way that NHS health data is structured means that it's some of the most valuable health data anywhere in the world. It's got an approximate value of about 11 billion a year. And like we all want that to be used. Like we want the public services to benefit from that and not be lining the pockets rather of people like Peter Thiel and Palantir.
What do we know about, because the new plans, this is kind of the last 18 months, but now this new resurgence and intensity of Starmer saying, we're so excited about all these opportunities with AI. Are there other companies bidding? Is Palantir trying to take more? What's happening now?
Yeah, so a couple of weeks ago, the COVID-19 inquiry was going on, and the leader of Palantir UK, a guy called Lewis Mosley, put in a witness statement, and in it he suggests that the whole of government needs an operating system similar to the FDP, and of course Palantir should be the ones to provide it. And so I think, more generally we're seeing sort of, I think we were just talking before this, and I don't think this is new in the UK. I don't think it's new that these companies are trying to come in and offer these whiz-bang services that cut costs and increase efficiency. But, they actually don't, I think, is the truth. Palantir hopefully do not get the opportunity to provide the single source of operating systems for the whole of the UK government. But yeah, it's certainly a worrying trend, that kind of reliance on these systems provided by private companies. And often where there isn't, like in the context of health, I think there's a big question about, like, given health is, the NHS works based on public trust, and it will only continue to work based on public trust. And if you have questionable companies like Palantir who do not scream, trust me, then I think that causes us some problems down the line.
Do you guys have any questions for Martha? Yeah.
No, just the extra point on the fact that there's also a missed opportunity for UK companies, and especially because the Starmer government is so keen on this, mythical growth, right? The whole thing is for this quest for growth, and it feels so short-sighted that they're selling away a treasure trove of data that could actually, not only all the things you said, be good for public health outcomes, et cetera, but could also actually provide an opportunity for homegrown businesses and startups and others. Like, I think that we're really missing kind of the fact that there is also a pro-growth narrative around public interest technology that could actually be enabling a different kind of entrepreneurship and new kinds of business models. And it feels like that's what we would have expected from a progressive Labour government. And it's just so disappointing to see that they're not, that we've got the same old rubbish.
Yeah, I agree. One of the things I didn't say in my intro is that I'm a recovering politician. And it means that I bring an insight and also frustration when policy advocacy and politics collide. We need to understand that in party politics, they are saying the message now for winning the next election in 5 years' time. And so we need to understand their vehicles and their constraints, because it's about elections and winning. And we often are not in the rooms, my other hat on, the advocacy, the lived experience, the expertise. Those that don't have the money are not often in the room to say, look, we have the solutions to help you win the next election. You don't have to win in this way. And I think that's the big disconnect. We are not being able to kind of PR spin our important advocacy and policy work in a way that translates to party politics. And we can keep saying the party system is rubbish and it needs to change. Yes, it's true. But if we want to be winning the progressive arguments on our policies, we need to translate not just to media journalists and brief them, not just to citizens, which is important, we need to bring them along, but also to local councils, to the mayors, to devolved governments, that we have forgotten those bedrocks of democracy. And if we forget those on this side of history, the bad guys, the naughty ones, haven't. They are going to keep saying, we've got a need for you, we've got a need for you. We also have the need, and we also need to be thinking long-term, generational and big. But again, another factor that I think needs to come into this conversation is funding. But we don't have the money, so we are doing two jobs. We're raising the money and the funds and the resources, learning how to run an organisation, which is hard, and then having to do advocacy. So we're doing three jobs in one. So this thing for me comes down to all of this amazing work. Like my mouth drops and I'm thinking, am I in the UK or am I in Nigeria when you're talking about corruption? I'm so amazed by the corruption that is slick here. But I think that we're not translating our beautiful, amazing, rich data and messaging in a way that Sir Keir Starmer and ministers who have in competing time right now, the economy is fucked. And we are not talking in economic language. We're not going to be invited to the room.
Can we stay with Palantir for a second? Come back to it. Just very conscious that, for folks here, just show of hands. Who knows about Palantir? Okay, we all know about Palantir. Great, fantastic. Because one of the things that I'm conscious of is pushing back on, the bedrocks of some of our democratic institutions and the ways in which we hold our governments to account to deliver on things like health, is by also knowing when they are in bed with actors that Martha and Foxglove and others have been really good at pointing out are actually evil, and they've been telling you they're evil for years. One thing that I'm, really struck by is the ways in which this same experiment was carried out in the US, right? They worked with the NIH, and they also provided Palantir tools for them for about $1. Have we seen any efficiency gains in the US healthcare system? Is there anything healthcare-wise in the US that tells you that things are going really great and efficiently over there, or have been for years? And then what they actually did was the tools of Palantir, Foundry, Gotham, were used by Immigration Customs Enforcement, who you've probably heard a lot about in recent weeks, to arrest, detain, detect, deport 800 factory workers in Mississippi, right? Undocumented factory workers in broad daylight while their kids were still in school. So like nobody could know that their families were actually being detained and deported by ICE. And if you talk to them and you ask them, what is your model? What are you actually doing? Back then anyway, they would be saying that, oh, they were helping find missing children. They were creating missing children, right? And they would tell you that, no, don't worry, we're just using these tools to help governments find smugglers. But if you ask them about data on how many smugglers they found, how many missing children they found, they have nothing. Yet we have all of this data that tells us exactly the kind of evil that they're up to. And that's not to be myopic or reductive about it, but these companies, when our governments come in and say, look, we've got this contract with Palantir, we've got this contract with Google or whoever, it's really easy to look at the language they use about themselves when it comes to their moral compass and what they've been up to. The evidence is right there, and I think that this helps us also present that and hold our representatives accountable.
Can I just kind of come back on that point as well? We need better infrastructure to share this intel. Beyond don't use Signal, don't use WhatsApp, stop shame politics in me. But I think this intel, what's happening in America, hasn't been able to get translated here, and also what's happening in Europe doesn't get translated to America because I think there's a lot of Americans, no offence, that are like, oh my God, the world is ending. And I'm just like, have you seen what's been happening in Europe in the last 50 years? It's not new, it's the same playbook. And how are we sharing intel around playbooks and around kind of the grooming tactics and the mystifying? How are we doing that side of capacity building so that we're not repeating ourselves? Because I've mentioned I'm Nigerian. We don't like repeating ourselves.
But Seyi, what you said in the last point was around we don't have any strategic communications capacity, narrative building capacity, and your second point there is we don't have any organizing capacity. And it feels to me like we have a lot of brilliant tech policy people, deep expertise, loads of investigations and research capacity. We have data. We have people who know how to go in and do advocacy in Parliament. But we have not invested. And we're still a new movement when you really think, like, how long is tech justice as a field? We're, 12, 15 years, that is actually starting to become a mature field. But we just haven't built like field infrastructure, movement infrastructure. And I think what we're living with now is this like sudden urgency of like, who's doing the organizing, who's doing the communicating? And yeah, that feels like the priority for the next few years.
I'd say too, I mean, the Online Safety Act is like one of the only pieces of legislation I can think of that felt like a multi-year process of organizing to try and like make some policy solutions. Do you want to talk a little bit about how that sausage got made and how you're feeling about it? Because it just came into effect, what, last week? Yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. I like that you called it a sausage. I'm still reflecting on my experience. So backtracking, I accidentally got into this tech space field by a video of a speech that I made in the European Parliament went viral and it was fine. And then somebody decided to put it on a neo-Nazi forum and then it wasn't fine. And so I was like, I've got to do something about violence against women in politics to save democracy. And so that became my kind of journey. And in this 8 years, we've had 2 different monarchies. We've had 3-4 different prime ministers, a Labour and a Conservative government change, COVID, you name it. It's been probably the most grueling kind of long-term campaign I've ever worked on. And my role, I felt, was trying to be a bit of a convener in this space because my organisation, Glitch, sits at the intersection of tech and women's sector. And the women's sector in the UK had just managed to get the domestic abuse bill into law, which is something they had been campaigning on for years. So they were all really tired and burnt out. And so my role, I felt, was to bring the tech expertise and the digital rights expertise and expand them to include women and mainstream the conversations around gender-based violence, and then also build the capacity of the women's movement who were on its knees to understand the tech space. And I think the Online Safety Act provided that opportunity to convene, to talk. So yes, it is a legislative act, which for those that don't know, it's a regulatory framework to hold social media companies to account. But you might have seen in the news recently that might now be watered down because of money, which we should go into. But it is a pioneering piece of legislation alongside the Digital Services Act in Europe that begins to hold social media companies to account. So I think as a piece of legislation, it is doing its best for what hasn't existed before. It was a very complicated, diverse topic of things: age verification, violence against women and girls, digital citizenship and media literacy. It was huge. It tested the field and bringing the ecosystem together, the builders, the storytellers, the influencers, Emma Watson, Jimmy and Jamil. Like, it was a real groundswell of coming together against something, and I think that is really important. And it pushed funders to fund digital rights scene differently, which was important, right? It was very white male, heteronormative ways of thinking about digital rights. Actually, this bill made funders have to fund the field very differently. Is it effective? It's now in the days, in the weeks. How Ofcom are going to be able to enforce the guidance in there? How they're going to be able to enforce? What's really exciting is that Ofcom will be able to name and shame and sue individuals. In the US, this was very effective. Able to name Mark Zuckerberg, name Sheryl Sandberg, name these people. Now we know Elon Musk's name too much, but it's helpful to name these people. In the UK, Ofcom will be able to name and be able to sue and fine individuals to start bridging this capacity that we can hold tech companies to account, because they have won that PR spin that there are this struggling startup tech bros in their mum's basement and they just can't do it. They just can't keep up. Like, they've been able to get politicians to think that that's true when they've got multi-offices around the world. And like, I remember being in a meeting with Shu from TikTok, and like, he was like on a vacation somewhere of an island I have never ever heard of, but okay, you're a startup. I was a startup in my mum's house in my bedroom, like, and that's what I call a startup. But anyway, this is not about me ranting about tech bros. This is about the Online Safety Act, and I think that it's doing its job in providing a framework, but Ofcom needs support from citizens. It needs, you know, the way that you've got people complaining about the TV. Oh my God, there's too many black people on my TV. We need those complainers to be complaining about what they're seeing on social media and what Ofcom is not doing, to be putting the pressure, because at the moment, the pressure is coming from those with money that is saying, water that down, that's not fair. The second thing that I think is really good about the Online Safety Act, that it's not just social media companies, which do get a lot of media attention. It's search engines, it's discussion forums, and I'm going to end here on that. The discussion forums is where a lot of the grooming and extremism and conversations are happening. Those smaller platforms are where a lot of boys, I'm sure a lot of people have watched the TV show Adolescence right now, right? That this is showing there is a real isolation of young men right now, and they're in these discussion forums just wanting to talk about, you know, getting summer body ready, or wanting to talk about mental health, and there are active groomers on there pulling them into white extremism, far-right extremism, and further isolation. And so this regulatory bill begins to start unpicking that, which we haven't been discussing before because everyone's been in their silos. So it really does allow for a joined-up approach. But I do think that Ofcom are going to need a lot of support around enforcement, because money talks, and when the economy is fucked the way it is, and I underline that because I think we've like gotten used to like cost of living narrative. I think we like make a joke of it, right? The cost of living, but like people are like really like dying here. Like, the economy is so bad, and so when you are in a scarcity mindset, you feel like you've got very limited choice in what you can do, and that's that grooming tactic that a lot of tech bros are using against our own government.
Thank you. I feel like there's a couple of things we could pick up on there, but do any of you have reactions to this? I mean, I know some of you probably, there's some things about the Online Safety Act we don't like, maybe, but I also am wondering if there's reflections. Yeah, Martha, you want to jump in?
Well, mine was more of a question, because we do a lot of work suing social media companies for behaving badly, but we don't really do that in the UK, and so I haven't followed the Online Safety Act that closely. And one of the things I think a lot about is, in this moment of these companies being such monopolies, and being as rich and powerful as they are, it seemed to me from the kind of like what I've read about it, that quite a lot of the kind of like it all seems to be about fines, which I think, you know, these companies, in my view, sort of bake that into the cost of doing business. And I know there are some things outside of fines within it, but I think this slightly brings in your case, but the thing I'm super interested in is the behavioural change that regulators can force the companies to make. Like, can they force them to change their algorithms so they stop promoting hate and violence? Can they force them to respect people's GDPR rights and that sort of thing? And I'm really interested in your take on whether you think whether you all think that it goes quite far enough, because I don't know whether fines do anything.
Yeah. The fines do something in terms of money. We don't have money on the progressive side, so we need money. And so one of the campaigns that we were pushing for was a tech tax, so that 10% of the tax on tech companies went to issues that were fixing up the mess of tech companies, right? We see that in climate change, we see that with tampon tax. So why can't we see some kind of cleanup mechanism from tech companies? So the fines help in that way, but does it change the behavior? Or the online harms bill or the online safety bill was never going to do that, because its whole premise was around being reactive to the harms. If we now called it the online joy bill, or the online, something that was more of a positive public policy framing, then all of what you're talking about around incentivizing the types of behaviors you want to be seeing online. So I sit on TikTok's Trust and Safety Council. In the last 4 years, we've been pushing them to incentivize the practices they want to be seeing on TikTok, right? TikTok pride itself about being about young people and joy. So show that in the user journey, make it easy to be incentivized to spread love, and make it easy to like things and be supportive and to amplify, not the hate, not the outrage. And I think that the technicality is an issue as well for Ofcom, being able to really assess the understanding of code. So my big issue at the moment is AI recommendation systems. So I can be watching something, or to be honest, my phone could be listening to my conversation, and then I go on a particular platform and I'm recommended content. I think that needs to be looked at, because the content being recommended to boys is very much radicalizing. What's being recommended to girls is also radicalizing, and then we're having this polarization. That is not good for society. So if we had an online public health bill, we could now have a set of frameworks to say technology should be incentivizing and promoting public health. But if we call it the Online Harms Bill, the Online Safety Act, we are going to have this very bottom minimal stuff.
I mean, I worked a lot on the Digital Services Act in Europe, and I feel like we had the same parallel fight for several years. And one thing that I think the DSA achieved more than the Online Safety Act was starting to have that risk assessment approach that means behavior change. At least in theory, the recommender systems, there is a way that you can actually mandate them to change the algorithms, in theory. The question that I have for you, which I think is what I'm thinking about in the European context a lot, is like, we've just passed these laws and it took blood, sweat and tears to get there, and this weird sort of consensus moment where we actually had kind of cross-party consensus that something needed to be done. We had parents up in arms and outraged because of kids. Like, now we're in this sudden moment where we've got everybody backtracking. Like in Europe, we're just this morning, today, it's GDPR might be on the fire of the bonfire of cutting red tape. And that's my court case, which we'll probably talk about in a minute, like rests on GDPR, and it might literally disappear within a few weeks. The DSA, I was just speaking to somebody yesterday who's saying that, this whole thing that's coming now from the US around the censorship industrial complex. I don't know if people have heard that term already, but this idea that all these laws we've been passing are actually part of this huge global conspiracy to try and censor the web and to censor, I guess, all those poor far-right guys living in their basements, the manosphere, et cetera, et cetera. But it's really, really concerning, because it's already translating into, attacks on researchers who are using rights under the DSA to get access to data. We've got lawsuits against those people. I mean, I feel very nervous that just at the point we're starting to talk about enforcement, we're actually going to see just this huge backtrack of these laws. Like, we might literally find that the Online Safety Act is non-existent. Just today, the news was that it's up for debate as part of the Trump tariff negotiations. So, I mean, what do we do about that problem right now to make, government hold the line, at least on what its own parliament has passed, right? If they're not even going to hold the line on the laws that they've passed, where are we?
The privilege of leaving my organisation meant I had a lot of time to think and see and reflect. And I have a solution, I think. And I'd love to hear what people think about this solution.
Oh my God, that's the best news ever.
A disclaimer, and this may make me unpopular offline and maybe online, but I'm used to online abuse, so bring it. I think DEI needs to DIE. And we need to have conversations across different lines than gender and race and disability, because social media very much polarizes that. And I think the thing that can unite us is money and talking about the economy. So I don't think we're going to win the conversation around safety, online harms, inclusion, all of that, by talking it through this DEI lens, which was meant to be an academic terminology to understand society, not to now be an identity that people have used. I think talking about now safety being good for the economy, good for growth, good for innovation, will now attack the very thing that you said, which was a somewhat like Dominic Cummings' line that safety is not good for growth. That is just not true. And there's the idea that we're in a geopolitical tech arms race with China. It's not true. If we can now actually show that and do economic modeling to say that if you put in these basic safety measures, you will save money. This is good for growth. If we can now make this an economic argument, because we're having an economic fight, and talk on the same language as those that are against us, I think that we can reverse this idea that, oh my God, Trump tariffs, we've got to renege on this. No, because then your economy will tank. Because look at adolescence as an example that has sparked public conversation. The cost to the public purse string, the criminal justice system, the mental health system, schools, this is a public health conversation. So if we costed it in a way that says the government cannot not enforce the Online Safety Act if it doesn't want to keep being in debt, I think we would have a very, very different conversation.
Isn't that kind of Doge logic? I mean, there's something. I mean, I think there is something that actually changes how you think about problems when you start from a premise of efficiency and economics. That I think can be helpful in the narrative, but I think in the strategy, I think it can be limiting and actually undermining. I don't know if there's Matt, I saw your body language a few times there. I don't know if you have thoughts on this one, but.
Yeah, I'm just conscious that part of the reason why we are here in the first place is, and we've talked about this a lot, and Tanya's worked on this a ton, is the business model that essentially is underpinning a lot of the tech companies, right? There's no getting around the fact that these business models are fundamentally wound up with A, surveillance, and B, spreading vitriolic content, and then having you engage with that content so that you can keep generating profits. And if you don't have that model at the core of it, well, then there is no profit for Facebook. There is no Facebook. It all becomes a public good. And so the conversation, in part, that I wonder whether we should be having is whether social media companies should exist to begin with, and whether they should be public goods, whether they should be public infrastructure. There was an emergent, nascent debate that was being had in the early days of Twitter that was about this, right? That was about, should this be a public good? And then, of course, you have the monetization incentive come in, and you have the X takeover and the Musks of the world, and you've got this sort of diversification, explosion of other tech platforms that comes with people abandoning places like Twitter and places like Facebook and Instagram and so on. And part of that moment, that decentralization, that explosion of platforms, I think can be a moment in which we go, well, what could it look like if it was different? What could it look like if we didn't all go to the very one place that depend on both our vitriol as well as our outrage as well as our data in order to function, in order to literally make a profit? And I think, without getting too Mastodon bro-y about this, or too blue sky bro-y, I do think they are creating at least a possibility of imagining in very tangible ways right in front of us how things could be organized in different ways. And we talked about before, Tanya said that the tech justice movement is not that old, but it's in conversation with older tradition of abolition, of justice, that are about power structures and economies, right? It's in conversation with migrants' justice. It's in conversation with Luddites. And I'm never going to have a conversation about tech in which I don't mention the Luddites, because they were willing to go and destroy textile factories in order to ensure that there was some form of conversation around redistribution that was centered at the dawn of these new forms of automation. I think similarly now, rather than thinking of ways in which to, although it's important, and your work, I mean, I am starstruck being here with you all, so I don't mean to diminish that. But, in addition to thinking about ways in which we can make these spaces safer, there's also a version in which abandonment becomes a plausible reality, a palatable reality, and the only way forward. Abandonment, destruction, move on to the next thing. Sorry, I'll leave it at that.
No, don't apologize. I mean, I feel like this connects to your case, because I feel like the version of Facebook that you've basically said they're required to provide you is one that you're not constantly surveilled for the purpose of serving you ads. Do you want to talk a little bit about what you were trying to achieve within the system that currently exists?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it goes as far as what you're talking about here, which I am such a proponent of, which is like break up big tech companies, break open big tech companies, decentralize, and public infrastructure. So, I mean, I think that's 100% the way to go. But working within the walled gardens we've got, I mean, I think surveillance advertising is the original sin of the internet, right? Like this unfair deal that people were forced to make, that they didn't realize quite what they were making at the time, where we just let this wholesale kind of invasion of our most intimate private lives happen as an exchange for the basic tools of the modern world. It's kind of nuts. And I think more and more people understand that that is not a fair exchange and that they want to do something about it. And this case was really about using the tools we do have, and GDPR being one of those tools currently, and we hope we'll keep having it. But 21.2 is an article within the GDPR. It's called The Right to Object. It was, at the time that I brought my case, it was kind of an undiscovered or slightly languishing right, like no one had really given it much attention. And the theory of my amazing legal team and some people that I was working with who've all been fantastic through this whole process, just to kind of emphasize this is very much a joint effort, we identified that right could really be used to challenge everything about surveillance advertising. So the right to object says, you cannot use my data to target me for direct marketing purposes. Now, direct marketing is everything that goes on with personalized advertising. It's an absolute right to object, which means the company can't say, oh, but you signed a contract, oh, but you consented, oh, but we have a legitimate interest, which are the other legal bases that they may argue. You just can say, doesn't matter, I object. So there's a sort of beauty to it. We kind of sort of saw it as almost like the Achilles heel of this whole crazy surveillance apparatus. So I took them to court. Facebook obviously disagreed, argued that it didn't apply to them. In fact, GDPR didn't apply at all to what they were doing. I mean, that was the best argument that they made. That personalized advertising is not direct marketing, et cetera, et cetera. They continued to argue that even after the Information Commissioner's Office, the ICO, the data protection regulator in the UK, did intervene in the case, finding exactly, basically making all of the same arguments my legal team made, which was amazing because we didn't have huge hope that the ICO was going to take a kind of progressive position, but it really did. And I think that, I have to be careful how I say this, Facebook, I think, pretty much Meta understood that, they were not probably going to win in court, and it went down to the eve of the trial, where they basically finally agreed to do what I'd been asking for 3.5 years, which is to turn off surveillance advertising, basically, for me. Which was a massive victory because it's the first time that's, I think, ever happened globally that they've agreed to turn off surveillance advertising for a non-paying user. But more importantly, we had this ICO opinion now, which says that's not just me. That's everybody living in the UK has this right, and it's therefore a gateway for everybody to do the same. And so we've launched a campaign with ECHO, which is EKO/object, where it walks people through how to do this. And we've already had thousands of people in the UK doing it, which is super exciting. And because GDPR is also in Europe, we hope that this will also be something that European citizens can do as well. So I don't think this is the way that we pull the whole thing down, but I think it's a chink in the armor and it's something to exploit. And the final thing I'll say about it is it's just been like an incredible, for someone who's worked as a privacy campaigner for like 10 years plus, I just couldn't believe the reception to the case. Like, I have just people writing to me, like strangers, being like, oh, I was watching the news with my wife. And, just like really touching, like people who've taken their time to tell me that this matters to them. And I just couldn't believe that because we grew up for so long with the, oh, well, if you've done nothing wrong, you've got nothing to hide. People don't care. People prefer convenience over privacy. I can honestly say the reception in the last 2 weeks is just, that is BS. I already knew that was BS, but like people are like, fuck off out of my life. Fuck off, I did not, this is not okay. And, and even like great Good Morning Britain and, just, it feels like it's an issue that has set people, people on fire now. Like we've had enough, and this is a very clear way that they can fight back.
Yeah, I think that deserves a... Martha, did you want to jump in?
Well, I was just going to say, I think like often when you're talking about big tech, there's like a debate about powerlessness and about feeling there's nothing I can do. These are like giant companies, and I think your case has really done a fantastic job of showing actually no. Like, sure, you had to sue them, but actually, like we can come together and we can force them to change. So yeah.
I think what you've also done is keep the momentum going around digital citizenship, right? The idea that we've got rights and responsibilities online, and what are the many ways that we can be responsible with our own data, with our own safety? Because I think when we talked about the online harms bill, it felt like the privacy stuff was getting pushed aside when they're so interlinked. So I think that the timing of your case and how you spoke about it as well enacted this culture that we have to hold tech companies accountable. Some of my work allows me to visit many countries and other people, and I was in February I was in a convening around digital democracy, and I got to meet some incredible civil society groups from Taiwan who was talking to me about how misinformation is very like culturally shamed. Like it's very like, you don't want to get it wrong to spread misinformation. You really want to fact check. Like it's really part of their culture, and because of the surveillance around China, that they really are mindful about what they share. They've got strong digital citizenship here. And I think what you're doing now after suing and saying this is one thing you can do means that hopefully their algorithms will lead them to other things that they can do to start building this culture of digital citizenship. So thank you.
Okay, and Matt, I had maybe a selfish question for you, which is that while maybe we're getting more GDPR protection in our use of Facebook potentially, if that button ends up going somewhere when you turn it off, maybe the right to assembly is kind of going away here. And I didn't know if you wanted to talk a little bit. I mean, I know your work on facial recognition has been global and has been going on for years, but it feels like here, just even in the last few weeks, facial recognition and connected to organizing and assembly rights feels under threat. Do you want to talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I mean, to give some background, the UK and the Met Police in particular has been experimenting with, as you might know, things like live facial recognition. For years, there was, court cases, especially in Wales, in which some police forces ended up failing, and they needed to at least use a very limited version of facial recognition. Often case that was framed as retrospective facial recognition, and these were tools that were deemed as being safe and only used in context of investigations. But what we've seen with the protest bill that came into effect during the Tories' reign, but also that's been building, again, this culture of fear of particular forms of dissent over many years, coming to an even more extreme fruition now under this government, in which particular forms of protest, particular political positions are increasingly in public spaces seen as let's say, too politically deviant. In particular, Palestine protests, I'm sure everyone will have followed, the ways in which particular people, in particular pro-Palestinian protesters, it doesn't matter if you're Palestinian, if you're not Palestinian, if you're Jewish, you will be arrested at times or detained or held back on the basis of uttering pro-Palestinian beliefs and speech. And what we're increasingly seeing is that being sort of a replicative of ways in which that censorship both has played out online, on social media platforms, amongst other things, but also being reinforced by things like facial recognition. Now that we have this protest bill in place, spaces for dissent increasingly being chilled, when actually we have a duty under international law to inform our governments that they have to, in fact, enforce compliance with things like the Genocide Convention that mandates of them to stop a genocide, right? Third parties have an obligation under international law to ensure that there is no contribution to ongoing genocide or international grave crimes. And so as people in this country, we actually have a duty to go out and protest. But that protest itself, that act of protest, both offline and online, is increasingly being criminalized. And that's a problem, right? And so ways in which people are protesting this sometimes is by narrating part of their dissent through creative ways of speech. We remember some of the TikTok videos from early on in which people would be dancing or putting on makeup and talking about Uyghurs who were being subjected to ethnic cleansing. Or remembering the ways in which people are speaking about Palestine in ways that aren't textual and often in images in other ways on Instagram so they don't get censored out. We're seeing people use things like dazzle makeup and face masks to try and make it more difficult for the algorithm to pick up who you are when it comes to facial recognition technologies. But what we know is that oftentimes you end up creating more rationale for governments to invest in technology that can identify you from just a tiny speck of your skin, right? That's really where this is going. A lot of this is just about how can we use the least amount of your body to identify you and to chill the amount of space that you have to dissent particular forms of order. And so that brings into question for me and for us as a community, how do you actively resist in this context? How do you actively resist in a context in which all of the institutions tell you by way of the law, the letter of the law, that you ought to engage in resistance, that you have certain rights that are being obliterated in front of you by means of both legislation and technology, but in which you are actively finding yourself being subjected to these forms of threats, both technological and otherwise. And I think some have, from civil society, found ways of doing that actively in effective ways. Like we've seen, again, going back to migrants' rights organizers, taking to the streets, literally smashing cameras. We've seen time and time again particular forms of boycotts come into place, people supporting the BDS movement in particular, trying to frame particular tech companies as contributing to, for example, genocidal acts. There are ways in which this becomes wound up with this earlier conversation of refusal that we were having earlier, because that refusal is not just about, so to speak, stopping a state from being engaged in questions of international grave crimes. It's also about chilling your ability to speak and your ability to move freely and your ability to be free. And in these ways, I think the issues of tech really tie together, the kinds of circumstances that the international grave crimes of genocide that we're now experiencing today are both conscripting tech companies in that process, but also the ways in which increasingly our shrinking civic space is also wound up with the conscription of tech companies in that very act. But yeah, I'm really curious about how everyone else here is thinking about resisting in this particular environment, because it feels so dire.
Thoughts?
God, it's
it's really dark.
To not feel depressed, isn't it?
Yeah. But I think this question also connects to the Online Safety Act in terms of the intervention of technology to create systems of control. And I think it's actually the thing that concerns me the most about it is the idea that we can use technology to prescribe policy solutions and get so specific at the level of like the person that we can like create these structures. And I feel like it's a similar system of control that the state is trying to design to be able to at any moment do particular things. And it does feel connected in some way. I don't know if you want to...
Yeah, your question around resistance. So, like I said, I took a detour from what I wasn't meant to be in tech. My passion is in the community, so I got involved in politics because a school friend and neighbour was a victim of youth violence. She was murdered at a house party. And so I really care about what's happening on the ground. So I'm not your conventional policy think tank person, which is why I swear and wear trainers to events, because I care about the people on the ground. So when you ask the question, how do we do active resistance, is how do we pass all of that the amazing things that you said, like I've taken notes, how does that get filtered through the ecosystem to those that are on the ground that are the most impacted by it, but don't have... between having to go to the food bank and then pick up their kids from multiple schools and XYZ, they're now not going to now pick up this, right? Like, how do we make it really easy for them to get involved? And I think one of the ways is through youth work. I really like how in certain states in America, the social workers and social work theory is embedded in quite a lot of this stuff around tech and activism and liberation work. And I wonder if with the death of the church and the death of the pub and all these other community spaces, is our youth workers, are our hairdressers, are our barbershops, these amazing public spaces where we can have the conversations. And I don't know if anyone's been to a barbershop. I've gone to a few and I'm amazed by the conversations, but they will rawly have conversations that because they're watching the news all the time. Like, it's on all the time. You know the joke about Uber drivers always having LBC on, like barbershops always have the news on. So they are plugged in. How do we have, bite-sized information around tech policy, around surveillance, things that they care about, who are already skeptical of the state, right, because of the history of colonization. These were the countries that were the most resistant to the COVID vaccine. That's an example of how much public trust is so low in these communities. How do we go in there and build the capacity in a way that is co-creating, where we get to learn from how surveillance is showing up for them, and how local councils are surveilling them, and how it's all connected. I think there's also a role for corporates, as always. We have these stores, like EE stores, Vodafone stores, 3 stores, and they provide data. They've come together as a collective to provide data as part of addressing the digital divide. Now, what about at the moment of getting somebody online? They were also given like 3-4 steps of how to be a digital citizen, 3-4 steps around privacy, around data, around something at the point of when we've connected them online. Can they get something? Can we gamify it for young people that go into the stores and look at like the latest like Samsung gadget and the latest watch? Can there be something on the screen that is a quick ad? You know, I'm asking you as somebody who's a strategic comms person, is there a way that we can make digital citizenship so mainstream in shops like McDonald's, where we know our communities are right now, in the food banks where churches are set up to provide food for communities? That's where we need to meet people. That's where I think the resistance happens, because we're seeing resistance happen in other forms of oppression right now.
100%, yes. Can you sign me up? Like, where do we go after this?
Okay, cool. You rest.
But this is it.
You rest after this, but I'm so down.
Strongly agree. I just think community organising is, I mean, a friend of mine came out of the tube the other day and there was a police van going down the street. I don't know, have people seen these with facial recognition? Like, I don't know how many cameras on them, and they have a big disclaimer that says, oh, we're just passively looking, but like we'll just, if we see you and we don't need you, we'll let you go. And he said that it was palpable on the street. Like, people were seeing this van and like turning around and walking back inside buildings, and like this whole public high street went quiet. And I just think that's, for me, and in a similar way that, you know, what I was saying about the reception to my case and sort of people getting it, I think there is it's not fictional anymore. For a long time, we were working around these issues. They were all slightly abstract and fictional. They were never fictional, as you've pointed out. They were always happening somewhere else already. And they were, lots and lots of people around the world were already living with these experiences, but they weren't yet felt in the lived reality of people in the UK. And I think now what it's been, since those early tests of facial recognition, how many years are we in? 6, 7, 8 years. You know, people are starting to feel it on the street, and I think that's where the opportunity is. What we don't have at the moment is back to the organising capacity and the sort of the funding. As you know, there needs to be like a really concerted effort to go outside of a small policy bubble, basically, I think, in tech, and that obviously needs resourcing the same way that, you know, climate change has resourced an whole environmental movement. You know, like, where is our movement that is in towns, like in barbershops? And, you know, I just think that's the next leg of the work that we have to do. So yeah, sign me up afterwards.
All right, I'm mindful that you all have been sitting so quietly for so long, and I'm sure some of you have questions for these people. So we're going to take a few. We're going to take one at a time, and I think Georgia, Jake, who wants to get a mic? Do you want to? So who has a question for one of these people? Yes.
Hi, I'm sitting here eagerly in the front row because I've been really excited about coming here. Thank you for your incredible contributions. My name's Asil Tid Ahmed. I'm the Director of Policy and a Health Equity Fellow at the Oxford Initiative for Global Ethics and Human Rights. I've spent my career doing advocacy, movement organising and narrative building abroad, basically. And I'm trying to find ways to access the tech world to offer what I can offer. I don't know what you guys know. Maybe you need to know what I know. How do I get to you? How do people like us join your sector? What are the entry doors? What are the skills that you're looking for? What are the buzzwords that we need to use? Because you guys speak a lot of stuff that we don't understand.
So what have you said that other people won't understand? Just kidding. I mean, you're in the right place, I would say. This is the first wonderful step, and they will be available
Thank you for coming.
after. Yeah, exactly. I think that's the answer. Thank you for coming, and we'll meet you very soon. But any thoughts on this? Immediate reactions? Especially you, as someone that has entered this space as maybe...
By accident. I think it's coming. I really sense it. We are still recovering from COVID. We are still recovering from a global pandemic. We can't forget that. People are just now starting to feel, and not everyone, not to make sure I'm not being ableist, like not everyone is able to come out, but more and more people are feeling. I think this is going to be people's first proper summer. I'm not saying we're going to get sun in the UK, but it's going to be people's first proper summer. And I think then once that starts happening, these like salons that we used to have, these like policy conversations. I remember going to like policy quiz nights, and I used to do a lot of organising in the Labour Party. So we used to do like pitches of policies. People could learn how to refine it, right? Like, how do we do those things? And that's what I'm really excited about. Not your usual conferences and your panels and all of that. Like, how do we do these really... how do we build the people's capacity to translate their amazing knowledge into information? How do we make that classless? So how do we really put that into areas and spaces that everyone can join? How do we make it really accessible? I think that's going to come. I think the impatience is there. I feel you. I'm very impatient. I told you I'm Nigerian. Another problem that we have, we're impatient. I just think it's going to come now that we've had a beat with COVID and lockdown.
I also think there's been, like, you were talking about kind of the how the movement, if you like, has changed over the last decade or so. And I would say that I think in the last sort of 3 to 4 years, I think there have been certain moments where people have seen that, or we've all realised that it isn't a siloed issue. Big tech impacts like literally every part of our everyday life, whether it's in interacting with an NHS system, using social media, paying a bill, like, you know. And so I think naturally the spaces are colliding a bit more, it feels like to me. I think that particularly in the context of public sector algorithms, I think, you know, there's lots of sort of groups that historically haven't thought about technology at all, who are now completely impacted. For example, disability rights groups who are, you know, for a long time have been struggling with benefit systems that are unfair. And actually, you know, now that the intersection of technology with that, I think has really, you know, opened the space, both spaces, and like required us to work more closely together. I also think things like People versus Big Tech has been very good at that in terms of like creating a really wide coalition of groups who are working on lots of different issues that intersect in some way.
I mean, we're trying. It's starting is the shortest answer, but we've got a long way to go. The only time I've seen it done so well is in Ireland. I went to something last year where, because Ireland is so small, they can actually do this. They can get like everybody in a room. So they had like everybody was represented when I sat across civil society. Really, I've never been in such a space that felt like everybody's issue was in that room. And it was an equal space, like tech. It wasn't a tech conference. It was a how do you challenge the far right conference. I mean, conference is probably not the right word for it. Organising thing, and it was amazing that the intersections of, well, I understand tech, but I slot together with you working in a refugee and migrants shelter, and you slot, and we were able to, by the end of the day, synthesize and start to have a common language. And I think that's the truth. Is like we have to create a common language, and I think that there probably needs to be more spaces where, kind of horizontally, we are all coming together around what we identify as the things we're trying to change together.
If I can make a call for, and everyone's probably going to hate this, when it comes to tech, I think vibes matter more than code. And I'm saying, no, genuinely, because we're being, and you know what, Alix used to work on this, she called it technical intuition, right? You sort of, this idea that, like, forget about technical literacy, it's all about intuition and understanding the technologies. through the feelings and the phenomenological experience of going through them, I do think that matters a lot more than understanding the code. And when it came to, for example, communities, migrants' justice organizers, et cetera, this creeping feeling that they were being watched, that they could not turn a particular street corner, that they could not go somewhere as per usual. These things are all wound up with experiencing forms of surveillance and tech that aren't actually about what's written in the code, but about how you're experiencing them. So it doesn't matter that a tech bro is telling you, this is not what we intended, this is not what the code is saying it's supposed to do. What matters is how it's being felt. And I think that is what can tie us together. That's what is the red thread that runs through the anger that came on the back of the A-levels fiasco. You guys remember the algorithm. The gangs matrix. You all remember the Dutch government falling apart over the child benefit scandal, which is about the algorithm that identified, right? You got Corinne in the back snapping. These are all about emotions that are wound up with belonging, with how I should be able to move, with how I should be able to access my rights that aren't about the code at all. And so in fields that aren't about, that aren't fundamentally in the conventional sense part of the tech justice movement, but that are about justice, period. I think we can lean into those without using Sheryl Sandberg too much. Gosh, we hate her. I fell into the trap. Is really relying on vibes over code.
It was such a good speech until that moment.
I'm so sorry. I'm going to cancel myself
Lean
and sing
out.
myself out.
Yes, it's like...
Other questions? Yeah, Jonathan. Yeah.
There he is. Sorry, this is the slow bit.
So just going to come back full circle to the reality of politics and the importance of power. At the next election in the UK, the most likely alternative to a Labour government is either the Conservatives or a Conservative Reform Alliance, led by Nigel Farage, potentially as Prime Minister. Power matters, and where people are matters. And say you've spoken so much sense tonight, but the economy is fucked, living standards are down, public revenues are down too. If you're the Prime Minister and you're trying to look to improve people's living standards and you need money and you need growth, I'm going to forgive him for a minute, because I think we all agree AI is not the answer. You're looking for a way out. No one's offering you one. All these companies are. So I want to ask everyone on the panel, if you're stuck in a lift with Keir Starmer, we can all say, don't do that. What's your do this?
I mean, part of the problem is that there is no really simple answer. I mean, I've spent years, literally years, trying to figure out part of how we have a positive vision for what we're trying to achieve means we actually have to have a positive vision for what we're trying to achieve. And it's hard. It's really difficult. I think imagination, political imagination, as well as our imagination, is a little bit trapped inside the walled gardens of the monopolies that we have today. They are what has produced the technological progress and infrastructure that everybody currently relies on. And it's very hard to kind of compellingly tell a story about what's the alternative to that. I think we have all of the pieces of that story. I think it's the stuff that Matt was talking about before in terms of decentralized social media, public infrastructure. I think there is increasingly a lot of work that I feel very excited about happening at the European level around this concept of the Eurostack, which is basically saying, you've got a whole bunch of problems that are actually getting worse because of your over-reliance on a handful of companies that have a stranglehold on the economy, that are doing a lot of bad things, not just for people, and you don't have to have a bleeding heart for this, but doing bad stuff for your economy, that are actually throttling everybody in Europe is desperate for a European unicorn, but for something to emerge from Europe in terms of tech. And it's never going to happen, and it will certainly and shouldn't happen in the model that we've got from Silicon Valley, that's for certain. But it will only happen if there's the political imagination to invest differently, we've got procurement, and things like Palantir is such a good example of the procurement power of the state as an actual market lever. How do you use the procurement power of the state to open up opportunities for, I was saying this at the start, for alternative businesses? I think that a lot of it, there's some interesting things happening now in terms of the shift to European cloud. Suddenly, a lot of European businesses are going, whoa, 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 whoa. What happens with the kill switch? What happens when we've got a hostile US administration and all of everything is on US territory, on US servers. We've already seen signs of what that can happen. People are starting to see it as a national security threat, I think, with Starlink and Elon's threats around Ukraine. So I think there is a moment right now where making that case that, yes, you're fucked right now, yes, it's hard, but doubling down on that is not a secure bet for you. You do need to start investing differently, enforcing your own laws, and actually creating the market and regulatory conditions for an alternative pathway. Like I haven't got that down to an elevator pitch to Keir Starmer, and that's actually what I again think like is what we really need to do, is figure out how to tell that story with as much data, with as many economists on our side, with as many, we need to build the bench of voices that can make that case in a compelling way. But that's the story that needs to be told, I think.
You'd convince me in a lift.
I sound like a bit of a
The lift is like stuck.
OTT person.
If the lift is like, got 10 minutes.
It's quite an intense lift chat, actually.
I'd be like, is someone coming?
I think there are. I agree with all of what Tanya said, and hopefully my lift time wouldn't be taken by hers. But I actually think like one thing that the Labour government has done quite well so far is in response to the wild union busting that we saw in the UK last year. The current Labour government has actually really strengthened the employment bill and taken quite a lot of things out that allowed those huge giant monopolies to union bust in the way that they did and treat their workers quite so awfully. And so I would say carry on that path, please, because I do believe that like union organising is one of my favourite resistance strategies to big tech, and I think there's like a very, like across the world we're seeing workers come together and challenge big tech in quite an awesome way. And then the second would be, do make a fucking great plan if you are going to go ahead with AI as the answer to the growth and economic issues that we're having, to ensure that we still have water to drink and energy in the grid in the future, because I think there's 600 data centres being built in the UK at the moment, and I think there is no coherent plan, and that is something that's going to happen. So I don't think that quite is the positive vision, but I think there are two things.
Your vision is like, don't fuck it up.
But basically don't fuck it up and like do some of what she said.
This is great. I feel like
I've got 6 Ds.
I was going to say maybe we could take one more question, but I think maybe we won't, and we'll hear your 6 Ds.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm sure. Yeah.
6 Ds. Democratic outcomes. So one thing that was very effective under the Blair governments was that while having a high majority, he was able to push for democratic outcomes, so improving the democratic function of the UK. We haven't got any vision around that. What is failing is because populism is on the rise, so we actually need to be having an antidote to that, and that is improving democratic outcomes. We need to get better at disinformation. I'm going to say this very secretly because it's being recorded, but I was asked to consult for the party in government about disinformation that the person in government was facing around the thing that he's Darcy from Bridget Jones and all these other things that were on the legacy of the Momentum stuff and
what? Got it.
You got it? But the uplift of the amount of work that needs to be done to address disinformation and do that work wasn't in time with winning. And I think disinformation education is key. Diversification of trade. We know that the economy is in Africa. We can see what's going to happen. Investors are there. Why is the government not there? Defence. I think what was really poor about the budget announcement last week was that it looked like it was disinvesting from disability cuts, which is true, but to increase defence in war and not explaining that defence was now also cybersecurity defence, because the war on information and Russia and misinformation is huge. And so there was an explanation thing there around defence budget increasing. Drama. When I was in what am I on? Five. Drama. We need drama. I grew up on EastEnders. I grew up on Corrie, Brookside, The Bill, you name it. Like I learnt, British customs through TV. I'm a working class person that learnt English through the TV. And things like Top Boy and Squid Games and also adolescence has allowed for a public conversation. Are we all having the right public conversation? No, but it's allowed for one. And yet we've not had one about about tech. We've had these like exposés and these whistleblowers and all the other things, but we've not actually had like good drama shows and sci-fi fiction and the arts. Like the art is a huge sector that should be helping us do the storytelling in this ecosystem that we want to be building. And finally, I'm going to say is digital citizenship. Like what is the small things that we can all do to responsibly enact our rights? And that also means protecting our digital rights as well.
I mean, I don't know how much more there is to add there. I would
Any
say...
more Ds?
Any more Ds? I mean... okay, I would get him in the elevator. I'd say, you know, I know you've listened to like 3 speeches now. I'm going to try to make this short. Sir Prime Minister, don't capitulate. Do labor. Just do labor. Labor was founded on the idea of a coalition of unionists, workers, working class people, not just whatever you framed as working people, which is a very particular framing which is utilized to weaponize and create space for things like, you know, reducing the welfare benefits, the disabilities benefits that were previously available. The language of working people, meaning literally people who are in work, not people who are currently receiving benefits, is itself creating stratification within the working classes in ways that are not beneficial, that are not labor. So first, do labor. Second, I think the state needs to divest, there's a D, from experimental speculative forms of capitalism, which to me is AI hype, right? Like AI hype ultimately is all about numbers and markets. It's not about tried and tested ways in which communities are known to thrive and flourish. That requires real investment in education, in healthcare. There's no shortcut for these things. That's why we require a state that's based on the kinds of principles that comes with the Labour Party, right? Or at least used to. And that's also why slightly, you know, when we come to this conversation of populism, taking off my amnesty hat very aggressively, I don't think there's anything necessarily bad about populism. Populism is a thin ideology, right? It's not necessarily going hand in hand with the right. It has also gone hand in hand with the left, right? Populism has been used to achieve momentous things, things like, you know, the movement that came from the suffragettes, things that came with establishing the weekend. There are fundamental rights that we take for granted today that have come through populism. Keynesian economics, you name it. We need a version of populism that is fundamentally addressing the kinds of speculative, market-capitulating logics that sit at the core of parties like the Labour Party today. And I'll stop there.
Yeah.
Why am I giving you this?
Take
my giant microphone.
Just mic drop. Thank you, Sakia.
Okay, I think that was can we end? We'll just end there. Yeah, does that sound good? Okay, well, thanks, everybody. We're going to now have some time to hang out in this little space out here. There are drinks available for purchase. And you come meet all these people, I think, is the next step in your networking journey. It's going to be great. I really, really believe in you. But thank you, guys. This was so good. Lovely conversation. Learned a lot. You're just great.
We should get together not just when Alix comes to town.
Please don't.
Hang out.
It's the first time you've managed to gather us just with your presence.
Yeah.
So thank you.
You know, I think Jake and Georgia also had something to do with it, but we'll go with that. Okay, well, thanks everybody. This was lovely, and we will continue hanging out very soon. Cool.